I'm going to talk about now, which is drilling down, if you will, on a particular problem that we have kind of uncovered, or not uncovered, it's been there, but that we have discovered as a company at Nine Power Clean Water when we were interviewing different folks that are running well drilling operations and clean water operations in developing countries, and that is heavy metals. Now, you've already touched on this a good deal with arsenic, and that is a real problem. Next slide. Okay, this go on to the next one. That one's pretty much groundwater, of course, accounts for about 30% of the total freshwater resources, but the problem is it's out of sight, and so people don't think about, oh, what's coming in from out of the ground. They don't think that they need to test it, or that there might be something wrong with it. So, next slide. 115 people die in Africa every hour based on all of these things. And like Rima was saying, diarrhea, cholera, E. coli, all these things that cause that kind of death. But this is what we need to look at as well. And that's damage from heavy metals. And heavy metals can get into people, animal, and plants through, ingesting it, inhaling it even, and even by contact with the skin. Here are some of the heavy metals and different things that we have found in Zambia and Sierra Leone. What got us started with these two countries is I have a friend who is operating a well drilling freshwater operation in Zambia and Sierra Leone. She has drilled 20 wells in Sierra Leone. I asked her not too long ago, this year, what kind of testing are you doing on the water that's coming up out of these wells? And she goes, oh, we test for E. coli. And I go, what else are you testing for? And she goes, is there anything else I should be testing for? So 20 wells she has drilled, and she's pretty sure there's no E. coli, but she doesn't know for sure about the rest of these things. And so when she went back to Africa, I sent her, over the summer, I sent her with containers to get water and ship it back to us. Because in Sierra Leone, I can't find a lab. Maybe somebody else can. Is there a lab? And I couldn't find one in Zambia either. So, so we're going to do the long distance haul thing and ship it back here, and then have it run through an EPA lab. And the reason we're doing that is we actually pinpointed all of her wells in Sierra Leone and found that they are downstream. Some of them are downstream of mining operations, copper, nickel, all kinds of things that could be a problem. Next slide. Okay, Nigeria is another place that seems to have a real problem, and that is a lot of it because of the oil and gas industry that goes on there. Next slide. Heavy metals and contaminants can be found in the soil and the plants, in the wildlife that they might eat, or the domestic animals that they might eat. Again, they get these heavy metals through ingestion or inhalation or skin contact. Next slide. And heavy metals can have a different impact on people based on their age, gender, how they got exposed to it, the duration of the exposure, and the individual susceptibility. A person's just individual makeup can make an impact on how heavy metals impact them. Next slide. This is, there's the WHO, but there's also the EPA. This is 8 pages of stuff. And I encourage you to just go to the EPA website and take a look at this and see what else can possibly be in the drinking water that you're dealing with your NGOs. Next slide. Why is this happening? Well, for one thing, we're disturbing the land, particularly, for example, we're talking about Africa. They're mining, they're clear cutting, they're building, they're disturbing the ground, and many times heavy metals are just naturally occurring in the soil. But in other cases, they're coming out of the products of the factories, industry, farms, pesticides, herbicides, runoff. These folks frequently are not following any kind of regulations or suggestions for use. They're being there's disposal problems with pesticides, herbicides, and all these different chemicals that are used in mining and farming. Next slide. Toxic metals exposure can cause all kinds of things. Everything right up to death. And I think y'all know that. Next slide. If we want to take a look at arsenic, I think sometimes we hear, oh, arsenic's a bad thing, but you frequently don't stop and think about really how bad it can be and how it accumulates over time in the human body and the impact it can have. Next slide. Just another slide on arsenic. Tells you a little bit about it. Next slide. Arsenic's effects on the human body. All of these, everything from brain function to skin lesions to liver cancer to just a huge number of things. Next slide. Food, soil, and air. Again, that's where they're getting it from. Next slide. Arsenic damage. These are some of the obvious things that can happen with arsenic damage. With the skin lesions. Next slide. Again, here we're talking about how arsenic can get into the water via mining or factories, sewage, farming, and just be naturally occurring in the water. Next slide. A little bit more on arsenic damage. Next slide. Arsenic in Africa. What I have been reading since I got started looking at this problem is that the United Nations, the WHO, everyone seems to understand that heavy metals are a problem in the water, particularly in Africa. Now I'm sure South America has also got its problems too, but we just want to talk about Africa as an example here. They realize that they're not testing enough for it, so they're going to try to do better with that, but we still have a long way to go before everyone adequately tests for heavy metals. Next slide. There's different ways of testing, like we said. My friend is sending back water samples all the way back to Denver from Sierra Leone, and we're going to test them in an EPA lab. But there's different kinds of testing kits that you can get and use on site. Next slide. Here's another one. Here's, $25 from Amazon to tell you whether you've got 4 of the big ones in there: iron, mercury, lead, copper, all that kinds of things. Next slide. Finding a lab. We have found in Ghana, Kenya, South Africa. There's labs in Nigeria, mainly because of the oil and gas industry. Saudi Arabia, of course. They all have good labs that are certified, and those people probably know what they're doing. But a lot of the continent does not. And so if you're going to, test water, which you should for heavy metals, I would suggest and be prepared to have to send it off to get it really done. You can do like a field test, a small field test, but then if you really want to know what these people are drinking, send it off. Unfortunately, to another country to get tested. One of the things that we go by is, are they big enough? Is the lab big enough to have a website? If it's big enough to have a website, then they're probably a more established type lab. But you want to look at their certifications and who owns them and who else is using them. Next slide. When to test? Is your well or your spring, like I said, downstream or near any kind of mining operation? There are any factories around large scale farms where they can be using herbicides, pesticides, that sort of thing? Are they close to a gas or oil depot? This is one of the problems with Nigeria. There's so much oil and gas drilling there, especially along the coast, that their water is getting contaminated. I'm not sure how many dry cleaners there are in Africa, but anybody who's doing processing or cleaning or storing vehicles, or any dumps, you might think, oh, well, that little dump can't be causing any problems. It's way over there. Well, guess what? It rains and it leaches out of the dump, and whatever's in that dump can find its way into the groundwater and into surface waters. Also look out for, burn sites. Next slide. Women are better at water management. We know this. Try to get the women in in the communities to work with you on testing. Rima brought this up. Next slide. And just another slide on women. Next slide. EPA. This is what I would suggest. I mean, I know that WHO has their list, but comprehensively, this is a great table that you can find on the EPA site. It tells you what it causes, how much you should, what the limit is that you should be trying to achieve, no more than a certain amount, and it's just very, very informative. Okay, and that's really all I wanted to talk about was metals. I mean, there's silver in the groundwater. There's iron. We talked about that. Cadmium, magnesium. There's just a whole bunch of things in water nowadays. Even though you think you're getting pure water by pulling it up out of the ground, you need to have it tested. Go beyond E. coli. That's the message I really just want to bring home.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you, Deb, and thank you, Brima. Those are really good. And Brima, why don't you and Deb just pull up a chair, and you could kind of tag team on any of the questions we have. I'm not sure if our Zoom friends can hear me, but okay. So if you have questions, please put it in the chat window, and we'll read it for Brima and Deb. We have just a little under 15 minutes for questions or just discussion. If anybody else also has any experience with testing water or not being able to test for water, and have please share those experiences with us.
Has anybody tested for anything beyond E. coli? And tell us about your experience.
Well, I've been, how do I put it? I always test for E. coli. We test for E. coli. pH is a pretty good indicator. If you have heavy metals, we generally see the pH being on the low side, which most heavy metals, say nitrates, nitrites, especially if there's any kind of agricultural around. Yeah. As much as I can get tested, I test for. If I can find, I had the same experience as you, and I can talk to you later. But Sierra Leone was very, very difficult. I was packing full bottles in my suitcase trying to see if I'd stick it because I'm sick.
Yeah, poor Sierra Leone.
I did, yeah.
In the worst shape,
And the problem I have with that is if you try to bring them back like that, then the time that you have, things are not nearly as accurate. So you don't know if the test results you get are how accurate they are.
I know. We don't have the final answer or the perfect solution for this problem.
So if you're testing for metals, the EPA methods have holding times.
Yeah.
The holding time for a lot of the EPA metals is 180 days. So I think you have a lot bigger window of holding times than if you're doing organics.
Yeah.
The organics have a shorter holding time. So it's 180 days for metal.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense. Yeah.
We also have preservation methods for metal.
Yeah.
Which you can filter the water and then add nitric acid.
Yeah.
And that can take it much longer.
Yeah.
But if you are dealing with a rural setting, sometimes it's very difficult to have that. But bringing water samples back, if you have partners in country and they help you get the right authorization, it's usually easier But if you want to smuggle them, sometimes you can be in trouble. But it's not very difficult to bring water samples back from most developing countries. If it is rock samples and all that, sometimes you can run into a problem. But it's much easier. But I know when you don't come from that country, it can be difficult. But when you work with the locals, you should be able to bring samples back.
Was your, where you were testing from, was that close to a big farming operation or mine or anything, or?
There's no mining in the area, that's what we're worried about, agriculture, because there's some of that. We ended up with, it's been, I have to go back and look at, pH was a little low, nitrates were kind of high.
But if the pH is low, I don't know how low it was. But most will be acidic waters.
It was like 5.5.
Okay.
5.5.
It's just a little bit below the range. It's 6.5 to 8.5. So, but if it is highly acidic, sometimes it will be finding the range.
We have, we have a question on the chat
Sure.
box, Naomi, but I was told that those of you on Zoom can just get our attention and speak up also, we can hear you. But Naomi's question is, are there private sector opportunities or presence for water testing in these regions?
Sure, if you want to take yeah, they need them, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's not developed very much yet. It's still very much done by organizations and people who have labs. You can take water samples there. But I think that's an area that needs growth. We train as secretaries, hoping that they can also get money out of it. But they haven't been able to do that yet. There's a lot of sachet water or bottled water in plastic bags all over in developing countries. This is an area of also concern.
Yeah.
But I think there's potential for entrepreneurship and business.
Especially in countries like Sierra Leone, Zambia, places that don't already have labs. That we haven't been able to find one.
World Vision Project, they handle,
Yeah.
I figured that was the case.
With heavy metals and everything. They have an AAS and they have,
Well, it seems like maybe part of the solution to the problem would be instead of smuggling things back or shipping them back, to support these labs that, they're trying to make it do and get by.
That's a good point because that's what DRI did. Because initially we have to ship all the samples back to the US. Then we decided to help them in country to be able to do that. Because it becomes very difficult. The holding time, the cost, and
Well, and you may not have to ship it all the way back to the US. You might just ship it up to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, even one of the more urbanized countries that has a good lab.
Kenya has a huge CDC presence. I used to work in Super. They have a state-of-the-art lab that you would find here in Atlanta. So,
Ship it to Kenya then. Yeah. I've been most concerned and worried about these countries where they don't have a lab because they're in such they're in the shambles like Sierra Leone.
And if they have labs and they are not certified at the regular time, sometimes they don't come up with a good analysis, and you may get them and they are probably not the right analysis, and that can also be a problem.
I've also heard of reports being falsified. Sierra Leone again is another one where they would, take water sample in, they get it back, and it had been altered because the local chief didn't even want anybody to know that that's what was in the water.
There's nothing from the.
The last question was from one of our participants, but Adrian and then Abe had a question.
So So your focus is on metals. But you also mentioned about the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. So you're dealing with a lot of you're dealing with
Organic
Organic.
organics, especially D-test compounds
Yeah,
that are just as bad or worse. You're dealing with
Exactly.
benzene, toluene,
Benzene,
liver carcinogens. And so is any testing doing from an organic standpoint? And are the companies at least being environmentally conscious of what the waste, are they, I'm sure there aren't a lot of regulations for these companies that are coming in drilling, but are the companies at least being environmentally conscious of what they're producing and trying to prevent these volatiles going into the drinking water?
we've done, we've really looked hard at Nigeria, for example, and the answer is no. It's in the water right off the coast. It's in the bays, it's in the lakes, it's the VTEX is a real problem. My company, when I'm a partner in Nine Power Clean Water, that's what we specialize in, is getting VTEX in metals out of large quantities in industrial water. So that's why we were called to Nigeria.
But the point you raised about organics, very important, because in developing countries we are still struggling with trace metals, and there's a lot of agricultural use of fertilizers and pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and then the oil. And all this area, we call them emerging contaminants, even though they've been there for long. So we have a lot of work to do because nobody tests for them. If you look at Haiti, the Central Plateau, when the French colonized Haiti for many, many years, the Central Plateau produced about a third of the food stuff for the new nations. And they use a lot of pesticides, fertilizers, and all that. Nobody has tested for that. And then we go with only microbial and trace elements. So there's still a huge area of water quality that we are not addressing.
So just because it's clear doesn't mean it's clean.
And Ade had a question.
Are there any opportunities for strategic planning to ensure autonomy and self-agency for communities at the community level in your neighborhoods? Can you see that happening? And if so, how can we be helpful with that?
Those would be the field test kits that we're talking about and engaging community members. But the field testing has a limitation in the sense that, like trace metals, sometimes the detection limits are not very good, and you have to take it to a lab somewhere. But a good start would be the field test kits.
And strategic planning, is there an infrastructure to make that happen within the community, within your communities to
I think for Rotary, the awareness we are creating through this is to see how we incorporate it into our programming. Yeah, but some organizations do that now.
So, in about 1 or 2 minutes, since we're needing to wrap up, can you say how testing relates to impacts? Because that's our theme for the symposium.
Well, testing, to me, testing is just very important. What you don't want to do is go and dig wells or drill wells and bring up all this water for these 30 people and then find out later that you've been killing them with what's in water. So, impact, yeah. Are you bringing these people water? Are you bringing these people water, but illness down the road? So, what is your impact?
Yeah, that's right. I know the first speaker talked about impact and had indicators around health. And I think one of the impacts is decrease in diarrheal diseases and all those things, especially under 5. And testing helps to set you straight whether you are actually providing safe drinking drinking water. So I think this is very important. And we can't overemphasize how community members see clear water and think that it's safe. So if you want to have the impact, you have to know whether the water is actually safe, reducing diarrhea diseases, especially among children.
Okay, so this will be our last question, but please.
With this being such a pervasive issue in the countries, are there programs that have worked well to remove heavy metals from drinking water, or is the strategy more to look for a cleaner source?
We have not found any kind of widespread or successful effort in most of the countries that we've looked at to remove heavy metals. It's just not there now. We're looking, we have an application, we have a solution machine that can do that. But that's how we got started in this stuff. Was we were looking for countries that needed our application. But we haven't found it. It's been in use. It's just Nigeria is in bad shape. For sure. Sierra Leone, India.
Thank you very much, Brian. And we need to go back to the main room on the first floor because we're going to have a lightning round session. I want to just mention for all of you, those of you online, and that all of these presentations are being saved, and we'll have them up on the District 5451 website so that you could access these in the future as well. So thank you again very much.
It worked out well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stay together.
Yeah.
We removed VTEC and heavy metal